have a few thoughts on Hasan Piker, who is a leftist streamer. Some people have sort of compared him to a left-wing Charlie Kirk. I think there are some obvious issues with that comparison, but nevertheless, he gave an interview to the New York Times just in the last couple of days, as everyone has been reeling from the tragedy, including, by the way, Hasan Piker. Now, I don't know that the New York Times would be interviewing Hasan Piker if he were a conservative and had a history of making some of the comments that he's made, but he was scheduled. One person who was happy to talk to Hasan Piker was Charlie Kirk. The two were scheduled to debate at Dartmouth later this month. I think that is fantastic, and it is a tragedy. We are not going to see that debate play out. Hopefully, Piker will debate other conservatives in the months to come, and we can all do that without fear for anyone's safety and have a good exchange of ideas. And I want to do a little bit of that now, actually, because something in Piker's interview with the New York Times jumped out at me. And by the way, many of you know I spend time with people on the left and take their ideas and arguments often seriously. And Piker, Zohran Mamdani is another person. Piker is someone whose ideas are obviously resonating with a lot of people, especially younger Americans. So I do absolutely take them seriously. And I want to offer a rebuttal with some substance here to, I think, one of the critical points that Piker makes, one of the predicates of his worldview, you could argue. He says in the New York Times piece, and we can maybe put the piece on the screen, he says, quote, "I try to redirect people's anger and resentment to systemic problems because I'm a leftist, I'm a Marxist, I'm a socialist. And therefore, I believe that everything still comes back to material conditions. And that's what people's anger and resentment are born out of, deteriorating material conditions and hopelessness that is instilled upon them because they don't see a hopeful future. There's clearly an affordability crisis. You hear Mamdani, by the way, talk about that a lot. There's this notion brewing among the youth because they're never going to retire at a reasonable age. They're never going to be able to own a home. 50% of our salary is going back to the rent, right? The price of a college education has skyrocketed, and it's not even a guarantee that you will have a decent job with decent wages and benefits that your parents had." Actually, just that entire graph in this New York Times article, starting with there is clearly an affordability crisis and ending with it's not even a guarantee that you will have a decent job with decent wages and benefits that your parents had. I mean, that is basically, I can co-sign everything in that paragraph as a Christian conservative. He goes on to say, so all of that, I think, feeds into this. And what I try to do is explain to people then when all seems hopeless, that the best possible thing you could do is reach out to one another and organize your communities to be the change that you want to see in the world, to claw back some sense of autonomy. Now, the New York Times actually just had a report today that said the fraction of long-term unemployed people with a college degree has grown from about 1/5 a decade ago to about 1/3 today, according to government data compiled by two researchers at the University of Chicago. The problem has worsened over the past year or two after easing temporarily. So this question that Piker raises is in some sense about motion, about regression. Some of the resentment that is boiling in the millennial generation and Gen Z is not just related inherently to the question of material comfort, but into a change and what is interpreted as a backsliding in material conditions. So I actually want to say I agree with him on that part of the argument. But what he said up top, again, going back to, I try to redirect people's anger and resentment to systemic problems because I'm a leftist, I'm a Marxist, I'm a socialist, and therefore I believe that everything still comes back to material conditions. That is very clearly the predicate of material worldviews, and he's saying it, and I think he's expressing it pretty well there. And the reason that I just wanted to pause and kind of camp out on that point, and I know that it's a foundational pillar that is kind of the cornerstone of a lot of materialist worldviews, is actually because Charlie Kirk's arc speaks. The arc of Charlie Kirk's career is a sort of giant rebuttal to that point. And actually there's some research, because I spend a lot of time with people on the left, I think about this a lot. And this is just me humbly talking about a point that I've spent a lot of time reflecting on in recent years, because it gets raised a lot in conversations that I have, but it's salient. There are a couple of important studies I've gone to over the past couple of years, because as these conversations about materialism, and it's chicken or egg, right? Is it the culture or the material conditions? Does a deteriorating culture or does a good culture produce good material conditions, or vice versa? And I've been sort of obsessed with that question in recent years. And one way I thought you can kind of look into that is by studying indigenous communities. And researchers have actually done this. So back in 2021, there was a survey that said, while cross-cultural research on subjective well-being and its multiple drivers is growing, the study of happiness among indigenous peoples continues to be underrepresented in the literature. In this work, we measure life satisfaction through open-ended questionnaires to explore levels and drivers of subjective well-being among 474 adults in 3 indigenous societies across the tropics. I think this one was in +1. They go on to say, the researchers, we found that life satisfaction levels in the 3 studied societies are slightly above neutral, suggesting that most people in the sample consider themselves as moderately happy. We also found that respondents provided explanations mostly when their satisfaction with life was negative, as if moderate happiness was the normal state, and explanations were only needed when reporting a different life satisfaction level due to some exceptionally good or bad occurrence. And this is an important part. They say, finally, we also found that issues related to health and to a lesser extent social life were the more prominent explanations for life satisfaction. Now, there was a huge survey in 2024, and this was in another paper with researchers from Spain, McGill, other places. They say, we present results from a survey of 2,966 members of indigenous peoples and local communities among 19 globally distributed sites. We find that high average levels of life satisfaction comparable to those of wealthy countries are reported for numerous populations that have very low monetary incomes. Our results are consistent with the notion that human societies can support very satisfying lives for their members without necessarily requiring high degrees of monetary wealth. Now, to return to this point about Charlie Kirk, who Brad Wilcox, one of the preeminent researchers on marriage in this country, has pointed out. He pointed this out in Deseret News just in recent days after the tragedy of last Wednesday. Kirk's positive vision of family life, of being a husband, of being a father, and being in a marriage with children may have contributed to Trump-supporting males in a recent NBC poll appearing to prioritize marriage, to value marriage at higher levels than other demographics. And that's really, really important to what we just discussed in those surveys of indigenous communities, where there's not a question of post-industrial material conditions. I don't know. It would be sort of interesting to have a conversation with Karl Marx about some of this literature. But I can see there is some material well-being that's critical to happiness. So far, we can see from the research. Health is a material condition. I mean, there's a question of mental health, of course, but if you're unhealthy, your life satisfaction is probably not going to be super high. And that's why I think conservatives have a giant blind spot when it comes to healthcare. That's a conversation for a different day. But also the social ties in your community, the fabric of your community. Is that necessarily material? I mean, you can kind of see that in both a material and transcendent sense. But at least healthcare is a pretty material reality. So that's one piece of the puzzle, of course. And I think that's where some folks on the left have a decent point, and the right needs to come up with an example for healthcare, with an answer for healthcare, because I think it's actually immiserating a lot of people in the country. But all that is to say, I read this article from Hasan Piker. I know he was going to debate Charlie at Dartmouth later this month. And because he articulated his position on material happiness or material life satisfaction based on material conditions so clearly, I just wanted to take a moment to address how Charlie sort of went from someone being a guy who was advocating using his platform to talk about things I agree with, by the way, smaller government, lower taxes, and ended really focusing so heavily on faith and family. And I think it's because it's become clear to everyone over the last couple of years, over the last decade, that we're suffering from deep spiritual, deep societal, deep cultural illnesses. Recently, I learned about colostrum. Have you heard about colostrum? I always want to do a Trump impression when I'm talking about, known as liquid gold that babies receive from their mothers after birth. It's packed with proteins, natural growth factors, antimicrobial peptides that work to enhance your immune response, reduce inflammation, repair and balance gut lining, reduce bloating, and make your hair and skin look amazing. Today's sponsor, Cowboy Colostrum, offers the highest quality cow colostrum. Highest quality cow colostrum available in the U.S., 100% made in America from 100% American grass-fed cows. They're the best cows, folks. They don't overprocess or strip their colostrum, leaving it whole, full fat, and high protein for ultimate nutrient density. It is the highest quality bovine colostrum you can buy, and it's easy to drink, made with delicious natural ingredients and no artificial flavors. It really is easy to drink. Simply add a 3-gram scoop of either the chocolate, Madagascar vanilla, or strawberry in your coffee or smoothie, or actually even in milk. It's really tasty. For a limited time, our listeners get up to 25% off their entire order. Just head to cowboycolostrum.com/afterparty and use code AFTERPARTY at checkout. That's 25% off when you use code AFTERPARTY at cowboycolostrum.com/afterparty. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them, so please support our show and tell them our show sent you. Say, I came from Afterparty for the best cows.